The morning Franklin Quinn found Penelope Foster collapsed against his fence gate, weeping into her torn sleeves, was the first time in 3 years he had felt anything beyond the hollow numbness that had settled into his bones after burying his wife. The sun had barely crested the Montana horizon, painting the sprawling grasslands around his ranch in shades of amber and gold, when he rode out to check the northern fence line and spotted what he initially mistook for a pile of discarded clothing caught on the weathered wood. As he drew closer on his bay gelding, the pile moved, and he realized with a start that it was a woman, her dark hair matted with dust and dried blood, her dress torn at the shoulders and hem. She did not seem to notice his approach, so lost was she in her grief, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken inside her. Franklin dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a soft thud. "Madam," he called out, keeping his voice gentle despite the alarm coursing through him. "Madam, are you hurt?" The woman's head jerked up, and he found himself looking into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen, wide with terror and exhaustion. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the fence post as if she could somehow disappear into it. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and raw, "please do not send me back. I would rather die right here than go back to him." Franklin held up his hands, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "Nobody is sending you anywhere you do not want to go. Let me help you. Can you stand?" She stared at him for a long moment, her chest heaving, and he could see her trying to decide whether to trust him. Finally, she gave a small nod and attempted to push herself up, but her legs buckled beneath her. Franklin moved forward quickly, catching her before she could fall, and she flinched at his touch but did not pull away. "Easy now," he murmured. "When did you last eat?" "I do not remember," she whispered. "2 days ago, maybe 3. Franklin felt a surge of anger at whoever had reduced this woman to such a state, but he kept his expression calm. "My house is just over that rise. Let me take you there, get some food in you, and then you can tell me what happened. If you want to, that is." She nodded again, and he helped her up onto his horse before swinging up behind her. She sagged against him, too exhausted to hold herself upright, and he could feel every bone in her back through the thin fabric of her dress. The ride to the house took only 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity with the woman's labored breathing and the occasional whimper she could not quite suppress. Franklin had built the ranch house himself 7 years ago, when he had first married Clara. It was a solid structure of wood and stone, 2 stories with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Clara had loved that porch, had spent hours sitting in her rocking chair watching the sunset. He pushed the memory away and focused on getting the woman inside. He helped her down from the horse and through the front door, guiding her to the settee in the parlor. She sank onto it with a sigh of relief, her eyes already starting to close. "Stay awake just a bit longer," Franklin urged. "I need to make sure you do not have any injuries that need tending." Her eyes opened again, focusing on him with effort. "Who are you?" "Franklin Quinn. This is my ranch about 15 miles north of Eureka, Montana. What is your name?" "Penelope Foster," she said softly. "I came from Wyoming. I walked most of the way." Franklin felt his eyebrows rise in shock. "You walked from Wyoming? That is over 200 miles. I had a horse at first," Penelope said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he went lame 3 days ago and I had to leave him. I gave him to a farmer who promised to care for him." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "That horse was the only good thing my husband ever gave me, and even that was not meant as kindness. He just needed me to be able to get to town for supplies." Franklin disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a cup of water and some bread. "Eat this slowly," he instructed. "Your stomach will not take kindly to too much at once." Penelope took the bread with shaking hands and bit into it carefully. Franklin watched her for a moment, then went back to the kitchen to start preparing a proper meal. As he worked, cutting vegetables and stoking the fire in the stove, he could hear her quiet sobs from the other room and felt his heart constrict in a way it had not since Clara's death. When he returned to the parlor with a bowl of soup, Penelope had composed herself somewhat, though her eyes were red and swollen. She took the bowl gratefully and began to eat, and Franklin settled into the chair across from her, waiting. After she had eaten half the soup, she set the bowl aside and met his gaze. "You have been very kind to me, Mr. Quinn, kinder than I had any right to expect. I suppose you want to know why I was at your gate." "Only if you want to tell me," Franklin said quietly, "but it might help." Penelope drew a shaky breath. "I was married to Garrett Foster 2 years ago. I was 18, and my father owed Garrett money for gambling debts. Garrett said he would forgive the debts if my father gave me to him as a bride." Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she were reciting facts about someone else's life. "My father agreed before I even knew what was happening." Franklin felt his jaw tighten but said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. "Garrett was not a kind man," Penelope went on. "He had a ranch in Wyoming, and he worked me like a hired hand. Only he did not pay me and he did not let me leave. If I made a mistake, if dinner was not ready on time or if I folded his shirts wrong, he would." She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her upper arm where Franklin could see the shadow of bruises beneath her torn sleeve. "He hit you," Franklin said, his voice carefully controlled. "Among other things," Penelope whispered. "3 weeks ago I lost a baby. I was 4 months along, and I lost it because Garrett pushed me down the stairs in a rage over some imagined slight. The doctor who came to tend to me, he told me in private that if I stayed with Garrett, I would not survive another year. He had seen too many women die at the hands of their husbands, and he could not stand to see another. Franklin felt sick. So you ran." "I waited until Garrett rode into town for supplies. I packed what I could carry, took the horse, and left. I did not have much money, only a few dollars I had hidden away over the months. I knew he would come after me, so I avoided the main roads and traveled at night when I could. I kept heading north, thinking maybe I could reach Canada, start over where he would never find me." "Why did you stop here?" Franklin asked. "I did not mean to," Penelope admitted. "I was aiming for Eureka, but I got turned around in the dark 2 nights ago and have been wandering since. When I saw your fence this morning, I could not go any further. I have not slept more than an hour at a time in 3 weeks, always afraid he was right behind me. I was so tired and so scared and I just broke down." Franklin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Miss Foster, you are safe here. I give you my word on that. You can stay as long as you need to, and if this Garrett comes looking for you, he will have to go through me first." Penelope stared at him, her eyes filling with tears again. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Franklin said simply. "And because I know what it is like to lose someone you love. My wife Clara died 3 years ago from fever, and this ranch has been empty of anything resembling life ever since. Maybe you being here is not just chance. Maybe it is something more." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of shared grief settling between them like a tangible thing. Finally, Penelope spoke again, her voice stronger than before. "I do not want to be a burden to you, Mr. Quinn. If you let me stay, I will work for my keep. I am good with animals and I can cook and clean and mend. I will earn my place here." Franklin shook his head. "You are not a burden and you do not need to earn anything, but if working will make you feel better, I will not stop you. Lord knows this place could use a woman's touch. I have let it go to seed since Clara passed." Penelope managed a small, tremulous smile, the first he had seen from her. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. You cannot know what this means to me. Call me Franklin," he said, rising from his chair, "and you should rest now. There is a bedroom upstairs, second door on the right. It was a guest room, so it should be clean enough. I will wake you for supper." Penelope stood as well, swaying slightly, and Franklin reached out to steady her. For a moment their eyes met, and he felt something shift inside him, some long frozen part of his heart beginning to thaw. He dropped his hand quickly, disconcerted by the feeling, and stepped back. "Upstairs," he repeated gruffly. "Go on now." Penelope nodded and made her way slowly to the stairs, gripping the banister for support. Franklin watched until she disappeared from view, then let out a long breath and scrubbed his hands over his face. He had not expected this when he woke up this morning, had not expected to feel anything at all, and now his carefully constructed walls were cracking. He went outside to tend to his horse and the other animals, trying to lose himself in the familiar routine of ranch work. He had 20 head of cattle, a few horses, chickens, and 2 goats that Clara had insisted on getting because she liked fresh milk. He had kept them all after her death, unable to bring himself to sell any of the animals she had loved. As he worked, his mind kept drifting back to Penelope, to the fear in her eyes and the desperation in her voice. He had meant what he said about protecting her, but he wondered if he was truly prepared for what that might mean. If this Garrett Foster came looking for his runaway wife, there would be trouble, possibly violence. Franklin was no stranger to handling a gun, but he had never killed a man and was not sure he could, even to protect Penelope. But then he thought about the bruises on her arms, the haunted look in her eyes, the baby she had lost, and he knew that he would do whatever was necessary. Some men did not deserve the air they breathed, and it sounded like Garrett Foster was one of them. The sun was setting by the time Franklin finished his chores and headed back to the house. He found Penelope in the kitchen, standing at the stove with an apron tied around her waist, stirring something that smelled delicious. "I thought I told you to rest," he said, though there was no heat in his voice. Penelope turned to face him, and he was struck by how different she looked. She had washed her face and hands, and though her dress was still torn and dirty, she held herself with more confidence than she had that morning. "I rested for a few hours," she said. "But then I woke up and could not go back to sleep, so I thought I would make myself useful. I hope you do not mind. I found some vegetables in your cellar and some salt pork, and I made a stew." "I do not mind," Franklin said, moving to the basin to wash his own hands. "It smells wonderful. I have been living on bread and jerky for the better part of 3 years." "That is no way to live," Penelope said, a hint of reproach in her voice. "A man needs proper meals to keep his strength up." They ate together at the small kitchen table, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Franklin found himself studying Penelope when he thought she was not looking, noticing details he had missed before. The way her hair curled slightly at the temples where it had come loose from her braid, the small scar on her chin, the graceful way her hands moved as she broke apart a piece of bread. "This is very good," he said finally. "The best meal I have had in a long time." Penelope smiled, a real smile this time that reached her eyes. "I am glad. Cooking is one of the few things I actually enjoyed doing at Garrett's ranch. It was the only time I felt like I was creating something rather than just surviving." "Tell me about yourself," Franklin said. "Not about him, but about you. What did you like to do before you were married?" Penelope looked surprised by the question, as if no one had asked her about herself in a long time. "I loved to read," she said slowly. "My mother taught me before she died when I was 12. We had a small collection of books, and I read them over and over until I had them memorized." I also liked to draw, though I was not very good at it, and I loved horses. We had a mare named Daisy who I would ride whenever I could. There are some books in the parlor, Franklin said. Not many, but Clara liked to read too. You are welcome to any of them, and as for horses, I have 3. You can ride whenever you like. Thank you, Penelope said softly. You have been so generous to me, Franklin. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, Franklin said firmly. Just having someone else in this house, hearing another voice, it helps more than you know. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and afterward, Penelope insisted on cleaning up while Franklin sat in the parlor with a cup of coffee. He could hear her moving around the kitchen, humming softly to herself, and the sound filled some of the emptiness that had haunted the house for so long. When she joined him in the parlor, she was carrying a book she had pulled from the shelf, one of Clara's favorites about a woman traveling across the frontier. She settled onto the settee and opened it, and Franklin watched her for a moment before turning his attention to the newspaper he had picked up in town the week before. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed between them. Franklin would rise early and tend to the animals and the ranch work, and Penelope would prepare breakfast and see to the house. In the afternoons, they would often work together, mending fences or tending the vegetable garden that Penelope had insisted on planting. In the evenings, they would share a meal and then spend a few hours reading or talking before retiring to their separate rooms. Franklin found himself looking forward to these evenings more and more. Penelope was intelligent and thoughtful, with a sharp wit that emerged as she grew more comfortable around him. She had opinions on everything from politics to literature to the best way to train a horse, and she was not afraid to disagree with him when she thought he was wrong. It was during one of these discussions, about a month after Penelope's arrival, that Franklin realized he was falling in love with her. They had been debating the merits of a new law being proposed in the territorial legislature, and Penelope had made a point so clever and well-reasoned that Franklin had laughed out loud, the sound startling them both. "What is so funny?" Penelope had asked, looking puzzled. "Nothing," Franklin had said, still smiling. "I just realized I have not laughed like that in 3 years. You have a gift for making me see things differently." Penelope had blushed, a pretty pink color spreading across her cheeks. "I am glad I can make you laugh." "You have a wonderful laugh, Franklin. You should do it more often." That night, lying in his bed, Franklin had stared at the ceiling and acknowledged the truth. He was falling in love with Penelope Foster, and he had no idea what to do about it. She was still legally married, for one thing, and she had been through so much trauma that the last thing she probably wanted was another man trying to stake a claim on her. And there was the matter of Clara's memory, the guilt he felt at even thinking about loving someone else. But as the weeks continued to pass, his feelings only grew stronger. He found himself noticing everything about Penelope, from the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating to the sound of her footsteps on the stairs. He treasured the moments when she would accidentally brush against him while they worked, and he lay awake at night imagining what it would be like to hold her, to kiss her, to tell her how he felt. Penelope, for her part, seemed to be healing. The haunted look in her eyes had faded, replaced by a cautious hope. She smiled more often, and sometimes Franklin would catch her singing while she worked. She had put on weight, filling out the hollows in her cheeks and the sharp angles of her collarbones. She looked healthy and strong and more beautiful than ever. It was early June, nearly 2 months after Penelope's arrival, when everything changed. Franklin had ridden into Eureka to pick up supplies, leaving Penelope at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the rifle close, just in case. He had been gone for perhaps 3 hours when he came riding back at a gallop, his face grim. Penelope met him at the door, alarm written across her features. "What happened? What is wrong?" Franklin dismounted and took her by the shoulders, his eyes intense. "I ran into the sheriff in town. He told me a man came through yesterday asking about a woman matching your description. Tall, dark hair, green eyes, traveling alone. The man's name was Garrett Foster." The color drained from Penelope's face and she swayed. Franklin caught her and helped her into the house, settling her onto the settee. "He found me," she whispered. "I knew he would not give up, but I hoped I had enough of a head start." "The sheriff did not tell him anything," Franklin said quickly. "I have known Tom Baker for years, and he is a good man. When Garrett described you, Tom said he had not seen anyone like that. But Garrett is staying at the hotel in town, asking questions, showing people a sketch he had made of you. It is only a matter of time before someone remembers seeing you." Penelope stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "I have to leave. I have to run again. I cannot let him find me here, cannot put you in danger." "You are not going anywhere," Franklin said firmly. "I told you I would protect you, and I meant it." "You do not understand what he is like," Penelope said, her voice rising in panic. "He will kill you, Franklin. He will kill you and drag me back to Wyoming, and I cannot bear that. I cannot bear the thought of you being hurt because of me." Franklin crossed to her and took her hands in his, holding them gently. "Penelope, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, and he saw the tears streaming down her face. "I am not afraid of Garrett Foster," Franklin said quietly, "and I am not going to let him take you. You belong here now with me, and I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe." "Why?" Penelope asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk so much for me?" Franklin took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment, that he could not hold back any longer. "Because I love you, Penelope. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe from the first moment I saw you at my gate. I know the timing is terrible, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I cannot let you go without telling you the truth." Penelope stared at him, her lips parted in shock. For a long moment she said nothing, and Franklin felt his heart sink, certain that he had made a terrible mistake. But then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to admit it, so afraid that it was too soon or that I was being foolish, but I love you, Franklin. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect and care look like. You have given me back my life." Franklin held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender soap and sunshine. For a long moment they simply stood there, holding each other, the weight of their confession settling around them. Finally, Franklin pulled back just enough to look into Penelope's eyes. "We will get through this," he said. "Together. But we need a plan." They spent the rest of the evening discussing their options. Franklin wanted to confront Garrett directly, to tell him that Penelope was under his protection, and that he needed to leave and never come back. Penelope was terrified of what Garrett might do, but knew that running would only postpone the inevitable. In the end, they decided that Franklin would ride back into town the next morning and speak to Sheriff Baker about the situation. If Garrett had been abusive to Penelope, if he had caused her to lose her baby, then there might be legal grounds to dissolve the marriage or at least keep him away from her. That night, Franklin lay awake in his bed, listening to the sounds of Penelope moving around in the room next to his. He wanted nothing more than to go to her, to hold her and promise her that everything would be all right, but he knew they needed to be careful, needed to handle this situation properly. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Franklin rode into Eureka with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. He found Sheriff Baker in his office, a small building at the end of Main Street, and laid out the entire situation. Tom Baker was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He listened to Franklin's story without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "I had a feeling something was not right when that Foster fellow came through," Tom said when Franklin had finished. "He had a mean look about him, the kind of man who enjoys hurting things weaker than himself. The problem is, Penelope is still legally his wife, and the law gives him certain rights." "What if we could prove he abused her?" Franklin asked. "She has scars, Tom, bruises that have not fully faded, and she lost a baby because he pushed her down the stairs." Tom sighed heavily. "Even with proof, it is a hard case to make. Most judges will not interfere in what they consider a domestic matter. But there might be another way. If Penelope were to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty, and if we could keep Garrett away from her long enough for the proceedings to go through, she might have a chance." "How long would that take?" Franklin asked. "Months at least," Tom said. "Maybe longer. And in the meantime, Garrett has every legal right to demand that his wife be returned to him." Franklin felt a surge of frustration. "So what are you saying? That I should just hand her over to him?" "No," Tom said firmly. "I am saying that we need to be smart about this. I will go have a talk with Mr. Foster, let him know that his wife is staying with a respectable rancher and that she is under my protection as well as yours. I will tell him that if he tries to take her by force, I will throw him in jail. That might buy us some time." Franklin nodded slowly. "And what if he does not care about your threats? What if he comes to my ranch anyway?" Tom met his eyes squarely. "Then you do what you have to do to protect her. And if it comes to that, I will make sure the law sees it as self-defense." Franklin left the sheriff's office feeling only marginally better. He picked up the supplies he had come for and headed back to the ranch, his mind racing with possibilities and scenarios, none of them good. When he arrived home, he found Penelope in the barn, grooming one of the horses with long, soothing strokes. She looked up as he entered, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "What did the sheriff say?" she asked. Franklin told her everything, watching as her expression shifted from hope to despair and back again. "So I am trapped," she said when he had finished. "Even if I run to the ends of the earth, I will still be his wife, still be his property." "You are not property," Franklin said sharply. "You are a person and you have rights, even if the law is too blind to see it clearly. We will find a way, Penelope. I promise you." She set down the brush and walked over to him, reaching up to touch his face gently. "You have already given me so much, Franklin. More than I ever thought I would have. If this is all we get, these few months together, then I will be grateful for them." "No," Franklin said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "We are going to have more than a few months. We are going to have a lifetime." He leaned down and kissed her then, softly at first and then with growing passion, pouring all of his love and determination into the kiss. Penelope responded in kind, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "I know you are still legally bound to Garrett, but in our hearts, in the eyes of God, if not the law, marry me. Promise me that when this is all over, you will be my wife." "Yes," Penelope breathed. "Yes, Franklin, I will marry you. I would marry you 1,000 times over if I could." They held each other in the quiet of the barn, the horses shifting and snorting softly around them, and for a moment everything felt right with the world. But the peace was not to last. 3 days later, as Franklin was working on repairing a section of fence near the road, he saw a rider approaching. Even from a distance, he could tell it was not anyone from town, and a sense of unease crept over him. As the rider drew closer, Franklin saw that he was a large man, well-built and expensively dressed, with hard eyes and a cruel set to his mouth. This, he knew instinctively, was Garrett Foster. Franklin straightened, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip, though he did not draw it. He waited as Garrett reined his horse to a stop a few feet away and looked down at him with barely concealed contempt. "You must be Quinn," Garrett said, his voice a low rumble. "I hear you have been harboring my wife. Miss Foster is a guest in my home," Franklin said evenly, "and she is staying of her own free will." "Miss Foster is Mrs. Foster," Garrett said, his eyes flashing with anger. "And she is my wife, which means she goes where I say she goes. Now fetch her out here before I lose my patience." "No," Franklin said simply. Garrett's face darkened, and he swung down from his horse with surprising speed for a man of his size. He crossed to Franklin in 2 long strides and stood inches from him, using his height advantage in an attempt to intimidate. "You have no right to keep her from me," Garrett snarled. "The law says she is mine, and I am taking her back to Wyoming whether she wants to go or not. The law also says I can refuse entry to my property to anyone I choose," Franklin said, holding his ground. "And I am choosing to refuse you. So get back on your horse and ride out of here, or I will have the sheriff arrest you for trespassing." For a moment he thought Garrett might actually throw a punch, and he tensed, ready to defend himself. But then Garrett stepped back, a cold smile spreading across his face. "You are in love with her," he said, as if the realization amused him. "Poor fool. Do you really think a woman like Penelope could love you back? She is using you, Quinn. Using you for protection and a roof over her head. The moment she has a chance at something better, she will leave you without a backward glance." "You do not know anything about Penelope," Franklin said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "And you certainly do not know anything about love." "I know that she is coming back with me," Garrett said, "one way or another. I have invested 2 years in training her to be a proper wife, and I am not about to let that investment walk away. You can play the hero all you want, but the law is on my side." "The law might be on your side," Franklin said quietly, "but God is on hers, and in the end that is what matters." Garrett laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "We will see about that." He mounted his horse and turned it toward the road, but before he rode off, he looked back at Franklin with cold, calculating eyes. "I will give you 1 week to hand her over. After that, I am coming back with men and I am taking what is mine. Sheriff or no sheriff, nothing is going to stop me." He spurred his horse into a gallop and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Franklin stood watching until he was out of sight, then turned and hurried back to the house. Penelope was waiting for him on the porch, her face pale. "I saw him from the window," she said. "What did he say?" Franklin told her, leaving nothing out, and watched as fear crept back into her eyes, the fear he had worked so hard to banish. "He is going to take me," she whispered. "He is going to take me, and there is nothing we can do to stop him." "No," Franklin said fiercely. "I will not let that happen. We have a week, Penelope. A week to figure something out." But as the days passed, Franklin found himself running out of options. He consulted with Sheriff Baker again, who confirmed that without proof of abuse that would stand up in court, there was little the law could do. He considered taking Penelope and fleeing north to Canada, but he knew that Garrett would follow, and that running would only postpone the inevitable. On the 6th day, with time running out, Franklin made a decision. He rode into Eureka and sent a telegram to a friend of his in Helena, a lawyer named Samuel Richardson, who owed Franklin a favor from years back. He explained the situation as briefly as possible and asked if there was any legal recourse they had overlooked. The response came the next morning, just hours before Garrett's deadline. Samuel's telegram was brief, but offered a glimmer of hope. "There was a precedent," he said. in which a judge had granted an emergency separation in cases where a woman's life was demonstrably in danger from her husband. If they could get a doctor to testify to Penelope's injuries and the circumstances of her miscarriage, they might have a chance. Franklin rode back to the ranch at a gallop, his heart pounding with renewed hope. He found Penelope in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to prepare lunch. "Pack a bag," he said without preamble. "We are riding to Helena today, right now." Penelope looked at him in confusion. "Helena? But that is nearly 100 miles away." "What about Garrett?" "We have a chance," Franklin said, quickly explaining what Samuel had told him. "If we can get to Helena and petition the court there, we might be able to get an emergency separation. It is not a divorce, but it would legally prevent Garrett from taking you until a full hearing could be held." "And you think it will work?" Penelope asked, hope dawning in her eyes. "I think it is our best shot," Franklin said, "but we need to leave now before Garrett realizes what we are doing." "Can you be ready in 10 minutes?" Penelope nodded and ran upstairs to pack. Franklin grabbed supplies from the kitchen and headed out to saddle 2 horses. His hands moved quickly, efficiently, years of practice making the work second nature. They were on the road within 15 minutes, riding hard toward Helena. Franklin set a punishing pace, knowing that every minute counted. If Garrett showed up at the ranch and found them gone, he would come after them, and Franklin did not want to face him on the open road with Penelope in tow. They rode all day, stopping only to rest the horses and grab a quick meal. Penelope never complained, though Franklin could see the exhaustion in her face. When night fell, they made camp in a small grove of trees off the main road, taking turns keeping watch. Franklin sat with his back against a tree, his rifle across his knees, and watched Penelope sleep. She looked so peaceful, so vulnerable, and he felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant breaking the law himself. The next morning, they were back on the road before dawn. They reached Helena late that afternoon, their horses lathered and exhausted. Franklin took them straight to Samuel Richardson's office, a small building near the courthouse. Samuel was a thin man in his 40s, with spectacles and a sharp, intelligent face. He welcomed them warmly and listened as Franklin and Penelope explained the full situation. When Penelope rolled up her sleeves to show him the scars and fading bruises, Samuel's expression hardened. "This is monstrous," he said quietly. "Absolutely monstrous. I will prepare the petition immediately. We can file it with the court first thing tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow might be too late," Franklin said. "Garrett gave us a deadline. He could be on his way here right now." Samuel thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "I know Judge Harrison. He is a fair man, and he has a daughter about your age, Miss Foster. If I explain the urgency, he might agree to hear the case tonight. Wait here." He left the office in a hurry, and Franklin and Penelope sat together in tense silence. Franklin reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We are going to make this work," he said. "I can feel it." An hour later, Samuel returned with good news. Judge Harrison had agreed to hear the petition that evening in his private chambers. They were to appear before him at 7 o'clock. When they entered the judge's chambers, Franklin was struck by the warmth of the room. Unlike the cold formality of most courtrooms, this space felt almost homely, with wood paneling and comfortable chairs arranged around a large desk. Judge Harrison was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He gestured for them to sit and listened carefully as Samuel presented the petition. Then he turned his attention to Penelope. "Miss Foster, I need you to tell me in your own words what happened. Do not leave anything out, no matter how difficult it is to speak of." Penelope took a deep breath and began to talk. She told him everything, from her father's gambling debts to the forced marriage, from Garrett's abuse to the loss of her baby. Her voice shook at times, and tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop. Franklin sat beside her, his hand gripping hers, lending her his strength. When she finished, Judge Harrison was silent for a long moment. Then he removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "I have been a judge for 20 years, he said quietly. "And in that time, I have heard many stories of cruelty and suffering. But yours, Miss Foster, is among the worst. It is a travesty that the law binds you to such a man, and it is a travesty that I cannot simply dissolve your marriage with a stroke of my pen." Penelope's face fell, and Franklin felt his heart sink. "However," the judge continued, "I can and will grant this emergency separation. Effective immediately, Mr. Foster is prohibited from approaching you, contacting you, or making any attempt to remove you from Montana. If he violates this order, he will be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Furthermore, I am scheduling a full hearing on the matter of your divorce for 6 weeks from now. At that time, we will present evidence of Mr. Foster's cruelty and petition for the marriage to be dissolved." Relief flooded through Franklin, so intense it almost made him dizzy. Beside him, Penelope began to cry in earnest, sobs of relief and gratitude shaking her shoulders. "Thank you," she managed to say between sobs. "Thank you so much, Your Honor." Judge Harrison smiled kindly. "Thank me by living a good life, Miss Foster, and Mr. Quinn take care of her. From what I can see, she has found a man worthy of her trust." They left the judge's chambers with the signed order in hand, feeling as though a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Samuel promised to file all the necessary paperwork and to represent Penelope at the divorce hearing, refusing to take any payment beyond Franklin's promise to visit when things settled down. Franklin and Penelope found a hotel for the night, taking separate rooms to maintain propriety despite their desire to stay together. Franklin lay awake for hours, his mind too restless to sleep, but for the first time in weeks, it was not fear keeping him awake but hope. The next morning they began the long journey back to the ranch. They took their time, letting the horses set a comfortable pace, and talked about the future. What they would do after the divorce was finalized, where they would get married, what they would name their children. "I want at least 3, Penelope said, her eyes shining. "Maybe 4. I want the house to be full of laughter and noise and life." 3 or 4 sounds perfect, Franklin agreed. "And I want to expand the ranch, maybe double the size of the herd. With both of us working it, we could really make something special." They reached the ranch 2 days later, tired but happy, only to find Sheriff Baker waiting for them on the porch. Franklin's hand moved to his revolver, but Tom held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy, Franklin. I am here as a friend, not as a lawman." "Well, not exactly." "What happened?" Franklin asked, dismounting and helping Penelope down. "Garrett Foster happened," Tom said grimly. "He showed up at your place the day after you left, madder than a wet hen when he found you gone. He came into town making all kinds of threats, saying he was going to burn your ranch to the ground and take his wife back by force. I arrested him for disturbing the peace and locked him up for the night to cool down." "And did he cool down?" Penelope asked nervously. "Not exactly," Tom said. "He made bail the next morning and headed out of town. I figured he was going back to Wyoming, but then I got word that he was holed up in a saloon about 20 miles south of here, drinking and talking about how he was going to make you pay." Franklin felt a chill run down his spine. "So he is still out there?" "He is," Tom confirmed. "But you have the law on your side now. I sent a deputy down with a copy of the judge's order. If Garrett tries anything, he will be arrested and charged with violating a court order. That carries serious jail time." "Do you think that will stop him?" Franklin asked. Tom hesitated. "Honestly, I do not know. A man like that, a man who sees his wife as property, he might not care about the consequences. You need to be careful, both of you." They thanked the sheriff and watched him ride away, then went inside to unpack. The house felt different now, both safer and more precious. Franklin found himself looking at everything with new eyes, imagining Penelope as a permanent part of his life here, not just a temporary guest. That evening, as they sat together in the parlor, Penelope suddenly stood and crossed to where Franklin sat. She knelt beside his chair and took his hands in hers. "Franklin Quinn, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter if Garrett comes back or if the divorce goes through, or if we have to spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, I will never regret finding you. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." Franklin pulled her up onto his lap and held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You saved mine too," he whispered. "I was just going through the motions before you came. I was alive but not living. You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to hope for the future." They kissed then, a long, slow kiss that held all the promise of the life they would build together. When they finally pulled apart, Franklin stood and took Penelope's hand. "Come with me," he said. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom, the room he had shared with Clara and had not entered since her death. He had been sleeping in the small bedroom down the hall, unable to face the memories. But now, with Penelope beside him, he felt ready to let go of the past and embrace the future. He opened the door and they stepped inside together. The room was dusty and cold, the bed stripped bare, but Franklin could see past that to what it could become. "This was Clara's room," he said softly, "and mine when she was alive. I have not been in here since she died, could not bring myself to, but I want it to be our room now. I want to make new memories here with you, good memories that honor what I had with Clara but do not live in the shadow of it." Penelope turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I do not want to replace her, Franklin. I could never do that." "You are not replacing her," Franklin said firmly. "You are something new, something different. I loved Clara with all my heart and I will always carry her memory with me, but my heart has room for you too, Penelope. It has room for a whole new kind of love." They spent the next few hours cleaning the room together, washing the windows and sweeping the floors and making up the bed with fresh linens. It felt like a ritual, a way of making the space their own. When they finished, exhausted but satisfied, they stood in the doorway and looked at what they had created. "It is perfect," Penelope said, leaning against Franklin's shoulder. "You are perfect," Franklin corrected, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Franklin's life. He and Penelope fell into an easy rhythm, working the ranch together during the day and spending their evenings talking, reading, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. They went into Eureka once a week for supplies, and Franklin noticed with satisfaction how the townspeople greeted Penelope warmly, accepting her as part of the community. The only shadow over their happiness was the knowledge that Garrett was still out there somewhere. Sheriff Baker sent word occasionally that he had been spotted in various towns around Montana, always asking questions about Penelope, always making threats. But he never came close to the ranch, and Franklin began to hope that the court order was keeping him at bay. 6 weeks after their trip to Helena, they made the journey again for the divorce hearing. Samuel Richardson met them at the courthouse, looking confident and well prepared. "I have gathered statements from the doctor who treated you in Wyoming," he told Penelope, "and from several neighbors who witnessed Garrett's temper. I have also subpoenaed Garrett to appear and testify, though I doubt he will show up." Samuel was right. When the hearing began, Garrett was nowhere to be seen. Judge Harrison frowned at his absence but proceeded with the case. He listened to the testimony, examined the evidence, and asked Penelope several gentle questions about her experiences. At the end of the hearing, which lasted less than 2 hours, Judge Harrison delivered his verdict. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Garrett Foster has demonstrated a pattern of cruelty and abuse toward his wife. Such behavior is grounds for the dissolution of marriage under territorial law. Therefore, I hereby grant the petition for divorce. Effective immediately, the marriage between Penelope Foster and Garrett Foster is dissolved. Penelope let out a sob of relief and clutched Franklin's hand so tightly he thought she might break his fingers. Franklin felt tears pricking at his own eyes as the judge continued. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Mr. Foster. He is not to come within 100 yards of Miss Foster at any time. If he violates this order, he will be arrested and prosecuted. This court is adjourned. They stumbled out of the courtroom in a daze, barely able to believe that it was really over. Samuel congratulated them and promised to send all the final paperwork to Franklin's ranch. Then Franklin and Penelope were alone, standing in the courthouse hallway, looking at each other with wonder. "We did it," Penelope breathed. "We actually did it." "You did it," Franklin said. "You were so brave, Penelope. I am so proud of you." They found a quiet corner and held each other for a long time, letting the reality of their freedom sink in. When they finally pulled apart, Franklin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I was going to wait until we got back to the ranch," he said. "But I cannot wait any longer. Penelope Foster, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You have turned my life from something dark and empty into something full of light and hope. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It had been his grandmother's ring, one of the few family heirlooms he possessed, and he had been carrying it with him for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Penelope stared at the ring, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Franklin, I will marry you. I will be honored to be your wife." Franklin slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed right there in the courthouse hallway, not caring who might see. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Franklin felt as though his heart might burst with happiness. They spent that night in a hotel in Helena, and this time, Franklin did not get a separate room. They shared a room and a bed, and Franklin made love to Penelope with all the tenderness and passion he had been holding back for months. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their plans until they fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, they began the journey back to the ranch, taking their time and stopping to enjoy the beautiful summer weather. They talked about their wedding, deciding on a small ceremony at the ranch with just a few close friends in attendance. Penelope wanted to wear a simple white dress that she would make herself, and Franklin wanted to have the ceremony at sunset, when the light turned everything golden. They arrived back at the ranch to find everything as they had left it. Franklin was checking the animals when he heard Penelope scream his name. He ran toward the house, his heart pounding, and found her standing on the porch, staring at something nailed to the front door. It was a note, written in crude block letters. "This is not over. You cannot hide from me forever." Franklin tore the note down and crumpled it in his fist, fury coursing through him. He was here. Garrett was on my property. Penelope's face had gone pale again, the fear creeping back into her eyes. He is not going to give up, is he? Even with the divorce, even with the restraining order? "No," Franklin said grimly. "I do not think he is, but neither am I." He rode into town that afternoon and spoke to Sheriff Baker, showing him the note, Tom's expression was grave. "This is bad, Franklin. Real bad. Garrett is escalating, getting bolder. The fact that he came onto your property means he is not afraid of the consequences anymore. What can we do?" Franklin asked. "I will send deputies out to patrol the area around your ranch," Tom said. "And I will put out a warrant for Garrett's arrest for violating the restraining order. But Franklin, you need to be prepared for the possibility that he might not wait for the law to catch up with him. He might come for Penelope directly." "Then I will be ready," Franklin said quietly. He returned to the ranch and spent the rest of the day preparing. He cleaned and loaded every gun he owned and made sure Penelope knew how to use them all. He checked and double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows. He even set up a bell system that would alert them if anyone came onto the property at night. Penelope watched him work with troubled eyes. "I am so sorry, Franklin. This is all my fault. If I had just stayed in Wyoming, if I had not come here, you would not be in danger." Franklin crossed to her and took her face in his hands. "Do not ever say that. You did nothing wrong, do you understand me? Garrett is the one doing this. Garrett is the one who is cruel and violent and obsessed. You are a victim, and I will not have you taking on his guilt." "I just feel so helpless," Penelope whispered. "I thought the divorce would end this, but it has not." "It will end," Franklin said fiercely. "One way or another this will end, and we will have the life we deserve. I promise you that." That night, they slept fitfully, both waking at every small sound. Franklin kept his revolver on the nightstand and his rifle leaning against the wall next to the bed. He dozed off several times, only to jerk awake with his hand on his gun, his heart racing. It was in the early hours of the morning, just before dawn, that the bell Franklin had set up began to ring. He was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his rifle and moving to the window. In the dim pre-dawn light, he could see a figure on horseback approaching the house. "Stay here," he told Penelope, but she was already reaching for the revolver he had taught her to use. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together." They went downstairs and positioned themselves behind cover, Franklin near the front window and Penelope near the back door, just in case Garrett tried to circle around. Franklin's palms were sweating as he watched the rider draw closer. But as the figure came into the light, Franklin realized with relief that it was not Garrett. It was Sheriff Baker, and he was riding hard. Franklin opened the door, and Tom practically fell off his horse in his haste to dismount. "Thank God you are both all right," Tom said, breathing hard. "I was afraid I was too late." "Too late for what?" Franklin asked, dread settling in his stomach. "Garrett," Tom said. "We found him about an hour ago, dead in a saloon 20 miles south of here. He got into a fight with another patron over a card game and pulled a knife. The other man shot him in self-defense." Franklin stared at him, unable to process the words. "Dead. Garrett is dead." "Dead as a stone," Tom confirmed. "I saw the body myself. It is over, Franklin. He cannot hurt Penelope anymore." Penelope had come to stand beside Franklin, and she swayed slightly. Franklin caught her and held her steady, and she looked up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Is it really over?" she whispered. "It is really over," Franklin said, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. Tom stayed long enough to give them the full story, and to assure them that there would be no legal complications. Garrett's death had been witnessed by a dozen people, all of whom confirmed that he had been the aggressor. Then he rode back to town, leaving Franklin and Penelope alone to process the news. They went back inside and sat together on the settee, not speaking, just holding each other as the sun rose outside the windows. It was Penelope who finally broke the silence. "I thought I would feel happy," she said quietly, "or relieved, but I just feel empty. Is that wrong?" "No," Franklin said. "It is not wrong. He was a part of your life for 2 years, even if that part was painful. It is natural to feel complicated things about his death." "I do not mourn him," Penelope said firmly. "But I mourn the time I lost, the person I might have been if I had not met him." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Franklin said, kissing her forehead. "And from now on, we focus on making up for that lost time. We focus on building the life you deserve." In the weeks that followed, Penelope slowly came to terms with Garrett's death and what it meant for her future. She threw herself into planning their wedding, finding joy in choosing flowers and food and writing out invitations. Franklin watched her transform from a frightened, traumatized woman into someone confident and full of life, and he fell more in love with her every day. They were married on a beautiful evening in late August, with the sun setting over the Montana grasslands and turning everything to gold. Sheriff Baker stood up as Franklin's best man, and one of the women from town, a kind widow named Martha who had befriended Penelope, stood up for her. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when Franklin slipped the wedding band onto Penelope's finger, his hands were shaking with emotion. "I love you," he whispered as they stood together before the preacher. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Penelope said, her voice steady and sure. "You gave me back my life, Franklin Quinn, and I promise to spend every day making you as happy as you have made me." They kissed as husband and wife for the first time, and the small gathering of friends erupted in cheers and applause. That night, they celebrated with a simple dinner at the ranch, and Franklin found himself laughing more than he had in years, watching Penelope dance with Sheriff Baker and tease Martha about her terrible singing voice. When everyone had gone home and they were finally alone, Franklin carried Penelope over the threshold of their bedroom and made love to her with a tenderness and passion that brought tears to both their eyes. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, talking about their future. "I want to start trying for a baby right away," Penelope said softly. "I know we just got married, but I am 20 years old and I have already lost so much time. I want to fill this house with children as soon as possible." "Then that is what we will do," Franklin said, pulling her closer. "As many children as you want for as long as you want." "Thank you," Penelope whispered, "for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for giving me a future I never thought I would have." "Thank you," Franklin countered, "for finding your way to my gate that morning. For being brave enough to ask for help. For loving me back." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Franklin dreamed of children running through the house, of years stretching out before them full of love and laughter. 3 months later, Penelope told him she was pregnant. Franklin whooped with joy and spun her around the kitchen until she was dizzy and laughing. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, converting the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery and making tiny clothes and blankets. Penelope had a difficult pregnancy, sick for the first few months and exhausted for most of the rest, but she never complained. Franklin doted on her, bringing her tea and crackers when the nausea was bad and rubbing her feet when they swelled. He marveled at the changes in her body, at the way her belly grew round and full with their child. Their son was born on a warm May morning, after a long and difficult labor that left Penelope exhausted but glowing. Franklin held his newborn child with shaking hands, unable to believe that something so small and perfect could be real. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, looking up at Franklin with tired but happy eyes. Franklin thought for a moment, then smiled. "Samuel," he said. "After the lawyer who helped us. Samuel Richardson Quinn." "Samuel," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Samuel. Welcome to the world, little one." Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Franklin found himself completely besotted. spending hours just watching his son sleep or holding him while Penelope rested. Penelope was a natural mother, patient and loving and completely devoted to their child. When Samuel was 6 months old, Penelope told Franklin she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their second child, a daughter they named Clara after Franklin's first wife, was born the following spring. Clara was as different from her brother as night from day. Where Samuel was calm and observant, Clara was energetic and demanding, crying loudly when she was hungry or tired and charming everyone with her bright smiles when she was happy. Penelope often joked that Clara had inherited her fighting spirit, the same determination that had carried her all the way from Wyoming. As the years passed, Franklin and Penelope added 2 more children to their family. A second son they named Thomas, after Sheriff Baker, and another daughter they named Rose, simply because Penelope loved the flowers. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running through the halls and playing in the yard. Franklin expanded the ranch just as he had promised, doubling the size of his herd and building a larger barn and additional outbuildings. Penelope worked alongside him when the children were old enough to be left with Martha or one of the other women in town. Together, they built something that was truly theirs, a legacy they could be proud of. On quiet evenings after the children had been put to bed, Franklin and Penelope would sit together on the porch and watch the sunset, holding hands and talking about their day. Sometimes they would reminisce about how they met, about the morning Franklin found Penelope crying at his gate, and they would marvel at how far they had come. "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not run away?" Penelope asked him once when they had been married for 10 years. "No," Franklin said honestly, "because I cannot imagine a life without you in it anymore. You and the children, you are everything to me. Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to really live again." "You gave me that too," Penelope said softly. "You showed me what love really looks like, what a real partnership feels like. I was so broken when I came here, Franklin. I did not think I would ever be whole again. But you put me back together, piece by piece." Franklin pulled her close and kissed her gently. "We put each other back together," he corrected. "That is what love does." As the years continued to pass, Franklin and Penelope watched their children grow. Samuel became a quiet, thoughtful young man with a gift for working with horses. Clara inherited her mother's strong will and her father's sense of justice, and she often talked about becoming a teacher so she could help other children learn to read and write. Thomas was the adventurer, always exploring the far corners of the ranch and coming home with stories of what he had found. And Rose, the baby, was sweet and gentle, with a love of music that led her to learn piano from a teacher in town. Franklin and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning gray and their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They faced hardships, as all families do. There were years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. There were illnesses and accidents and heartbreaks. But through it all, they had each other, and that was enough. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch, inviting everyone in Eureka and the surrounding area. The house and yard were full of people, laughing and eating and celebrating. Franklin stood with Penelope under the same tree where they had been married all those years ago, and he raised his glass in a toast. "To my wife," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "The woman who changed my life forever. Who taught me that it is never too late for a second chance, that love can heal even the deepest wounds. I thank God every day that you found your way to my gate that morning, and I promise to love you for all the mornings we have left." Penelope was crying, happy tears that she did not bother to wipe away. "And I promise to love you just as fiercely," she said, "for every day we are given and beyond." They kissed as the crowd cheered, and Franklin felt the same surge of love he had felt on their wedding day, undiminished by time or familiarity. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by the life they had built together. As the sun set over the Montana grasslands, painting everything in shades of gold and amber just as it had on that long-ago morning when their story began, Franklin Quinn held his wife close and knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The ranch they had built together would be passed down to their children and their grandchildren, a testament to what could be created when two broken people found each other and chose to heal together. The name Quinn would be remembered in Eureka for generations, associated not with wealth or power but with love, kindness, and the courage to start over. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Franklin found Penelope at his gate, they would walk out to that same spot and stand together in silence, remembering the moment that changed both their lives forever. They would hold hands and watch the sunrise, grateful for every day they had been given, every moment they had shared. When Franklin Quinn died at the age of 78, surrounded by his wife and children and grandchildren, his last words were of Penelope. "Thank you," he whispered, looking into her eyes, "for saying yes, for staying, for loving me." Penelope held his hand as he passed, her own heart breaking but also grateful for the 40 years they had shared. She lived another 5 years after Franklin's death, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories of their grandfather and the love they had shared. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, her children buried her next to Franklin under the tree where they had been married. On her headstone, they inscribed the words she had often said when talking about her husband: "He gave me back my life." The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and then under his children after him. The house remained in the family for over 100 years, a place where love and laughter always echoed through the halls, a testament to the strength of the bond between a widowed rancher and the woman he found crying at his gate, whose story truly did change his life forever.